Hello everyone, I'm Paul Wright. Sorry for the delay, we had a few technical issues. Welcome to my studio. This is the centre of my creativity, I suppose. Today, I'm taking on the Fine Art Fever Challenge, set by McKay Williamson. The idea of this is for me to make a portrait in an hour, which is a huge challenge at the best of times, but to be watched while I'm doing it, which has never happened before, is doubly difficult. The idea of today is to hopefully down the line generate some money for the NHS. With everything that's going on at the moment, we're hoping to auction these and make a bit of money for all those people that are putting themselves on the line for the good of us. So I'd like to just have a little whiz around the studio, just show you the context of where I'm working and the space that I occupy. And then also I'll run you through the palette that I'm using, and then some of the tools that I use, the brushes, the palette knives, things like that, some of the colors. And then as the clock is ticking, I'll get on with it. Okay, so let me walk you around. So as you can see, this is what we're working on today. It's my lovely daughter, May, in a mask and goggles. I thought it was very fitting. So this is the studio. Hopefully you can see it okay. So there's always things on the go. It's a bit of a mess, to be honest, most of the time. But it's this kind of mess that I'm familiar with and I understand. So this is where things are stored. This is where, there we go. So now let's have a look at the materials that I'm using. So I predominantly work in oil on canvas, oil on linen. And so this is my palette. So this is set up pretty much the same every time that I paint. So I almost go from yellow all the way around to sort of purples and blues. Sometimes colours removed, sometimes it's added. I always work with a massive dollop of white, which is mixed down slightly with some dryers. And I always try and work, if at all possible, with very large brushes. Now, it's not always possible, but I always find that the bigger that I work in terms of brushes, the freer it keeps me all the way to the end. So the first thing I would do normally is I've already been looking at the picture. I'm thinking there's a lot of warm colour on it. Let's see if we show you what she looks like. There she is. And I'm thinking firstly tone. So I'm thinking light and dark. What do I need to put against something else to make it stand either forward or back? And then I'll think about the colour to go into that. So the first thing I'm thinking about is, which is the lightest area? I'm thinking about the forehead, which I'd like that to be kind of yellow, maybe a touch of red in it. So I'll mix that up. I'm going to have to work quite quickly to try and get this done. Here we go. So I don't overmix the colour either. So it goes on fairly thickly and fairly quickly. So a couple of marks in. And then I'm thinking, right, okay, so is there any more of that? Yeah, there's a little bit down on the neck as well. I might put that in. This time there's a tiny bit of green in it. So I'm working down here, just a couple of marks down there. Now underneath that, as I look at this, there's a tiny bit of purple in the skin as well. And actually the coolness of that purple will help to drop that back a little bit. So we'll just mix in a tiny bit of purple. And hopefully with a bit of yellow attached, it should just drop in nicely. And that's made a nice sort of grey purple. So the obvious area that will give us the light will be the mask. Now the mask, I'd like to put some colour into the white. I don't like white to be white. There's no great point to that for me. It just dies. So I think for me, I'd like to put some pink, maybe some purple into the white to keep it interesting. And at the same time, I'm thinking this is very light, but I'm also thinking that this needs to be something else. So for that to work and come forward, I need this to be either a cooler colour, something darker, and I'll be thinking about that as I start to build this. So a cleaner brush. We start to look at that mask. So this time, instead of having any yellow in with the purple, there's going to be a little bit of pink, a bit of red. And I'm using, for that red, a very cold, almost a crimson. Here we go. So the lightest points around here somewhere. Maybe a tiny, tiny bit of yellow in there. I'm going to try and do this today without looking at the clock, but it's very difficult because I'm already thinking, right, how do I build a whole picture in an hour? So after that, I'm also thinking about the shadow in this mask. So I'm thinking, well, actually, the shadow's not that dark in the mask. The bulk of the shadow is going to be in the hair, the darker tones of the hair, possibly around the neck, just to give some sort of shape to the neck. So let's get a little bit of that in on the mask. And the shadow is kind of sort of red, grey with a tiny bit of brown in it. It's certainly not a dead colour. A bit of yellow in there as well. So then that will come in just to give a bit of shape underneath the mask. And actually it's slightly greyer than that towards the bottom. This is by no means a definitive way of starting a picture or building a picture. It's just an insight into the way that I would do it personally. Everyone has their own method, and everyone finds a comfortable way of painting. For me, it's always been this way, and I've adapted it a little bit, but it's been something that I've done now for 20 years, the same. So anyway, now we've got that in, I'm starting to think about this background. Something needs to happen sort of right at the beginning, just to give me an idea of what this is going to be compared to the face. So another brush. Right, okay. So I'm thinking I want something grey, maybe with a bit of green and blue in it. And it's got to be deeper. It's got to be deeper and darker than that mask. Okay. Let's put this in. See. So I'm thinking around this area here. I'll just put a couple of marks in. Okay. That's given me an idea of what's going to happen there. And then the other side could possibly be even a little bit darker. I'd like this to be also a little bit more colourful. So I'm going to put a bit less grey through it and a bit more green. Just to give me an idea. There we go. And also give shape to the glasses, because actually looking at the glasses here, you can see that the glasses are perspex, the goggles. So the perspex is actually transparent. So what I'm painting really is what we can see through it and the light that's reacting to it. So really, in a way, everything else will define the goggles. So in theory, I shouldn't actually have to paint the goggles. The goggles should happen because of the rest of the painting. So what I'm looking at now is I'm thinking about this very dark area in the hair. So I want to get this in. And I'm aware that this is actually a very, very deep, warm brown. So let's make something very dark, very deep. So it's got a tiny bit of blue in with the brown, and we put a little bit of crimson in as well, just to give it. So this is this area here that's coming through around there. Now, as part of that, there is also some green, so probably reflected off the background somewhere. Let's give it a nice contrast compared to the deep brown. So this is running through it also. It's probably quite a subtle shift, but it's just enough to break it slightly. So on the other side, it's actually the dark here is actually a lot cooler and a lot bluer. So that's going to go in next. So I'm adding blue to the same color with some green, just to cool it slightly. And that can come around there. So that gives me a sense of where the darkest areas are going to be. As we move around to the far side of the hair, it actually gets cooler again and gets a bit darker. So I'm going to put some more blue through that bit as well. And this should give a stark difference to when we start to put some of the colour in the face, which is going to be warm, some oranges, some reds, some yellows. Hopefully this then will frame that area beautifully. Right, okay. So there's no highlights in the hair, there's no little lighter areas. I just want to get some of that darker in. And you can see actually below where the goggles are in front of the hair, it's almost diffused the color and the tone. So actually, this area here below becomes slightly lighter, slightly grayer, and slightly more yellow. And that's purely to do with the light hitting that probably quite scratched perspex. So let's look at that. And again, it's quite yellow. A touch of orange. So this can go in here. And it's subtle. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough of a difference. And the same on the other side, but this time, this is actually quite red. So there's a lot of red and a lot of orange through that. And that, I imagine, is because of the reflection of the skin and off the hair on that side. So here we go. So again, it's a nice warm brown. And actually, as I go along, I'm starting to look at these colours and think, yeah, I can see that there's some there maybe and some there. And I would probably look to start to put those things in there. And already I'm looking at this mask and thinking, well, I know what this is going to be. It's going to be quite a yellowy green skin tone. So this, in a way, needs to be cooler. So I look to put something more grey, more blue in that area. So this is Payne's grey mixed with a little bit of cerulean blue and a little bit of ultramarine. So just to drop that down a little bit. And again, maybe a touch of red. Right, here we go. There we go, that's better. So now we're going to look at those warmer tones in the face. So slowly we're getting a picture of how things are going to build across the whole piece. So the key area for me is that the focus is going to be the eyes. I mean, because the mouth and the chin are masked, so that the whole center of our attention should come straight into this area. And this is also going to be a lot warmer, so it should feel like it's coming towards you as well. So the first thing I'm going to put in, there's a lovely band of warm orange that goes around, which is partly the shadow, slight shadow that comes from the hair onto the skin. Now we're hoping to continue these live streams and do one or two more, maybe a few more than that. There's also going to be coming up a sculptor, a well-known sculptor, also doing a live stream making a piece, which will be really exciting. So do stay connected with McKay Williamson's YouTube channel, and they'll be posting more information, I'm sure, about all the things coming up. We're hoping in some way that this alleviates a little bit of boredom for people, and also gives a bit of insight into just what it is that artists spend their time doing every day in their little caves. So again, there's some nice warmth going through there. It's a separation, but it's a softer separation from this heavy hair into what is essentially child skin, which is quite subtle and it's quite soft. So now I'm looking at this area around the eye there, and I'm thinking, well, there's a beautiful warm sort of reddy, very similar to this colour here. And we're going to put that in. So that sits in there. And next to that is a bit lighter, but it's more yellow. So I'm going to think about mixing that up. And so that will then just give the eye a chance to read the information that is different to that, and in some way that it's going round into that eye socket. So of course, next to this lovely warm sort of pinky orange is a slightly darker area and also slightly cooler area. So I'm going to mix something a little bit darker and a little bit more purple into that part. This can be quite different actually, because I want this to sit right back. So this is effectively the eye socket now. So this will sit in there. So we're just going to run that through there. Now all of these things are changeable, but it's slowly going to give us an idea of the 3 dimensions of the face. So immediately now I'm looking to this side of the eye as well, thinking, right, okay, so there's some lovely reflected light on this side, due possibly to the goggles. And I'm thinking here is a lovely sort of mid-tone of almost a yellowy green. I'm going to put that in. Right. So I'm using a very warm green in with some already pre-mixed sort of yellow and orange. And I'm hoping this will just give it a shift from the very warm oranges and pinks. So this sits in here. And again, hopefully should be very different from this background still. So I'm very aware that this background is very cold, it's very slaty, it's very grey-blue, but I want this to almost bounce off of that and come forward. So I see this colour elsewhere, but it's slightly more yellow. So that's going to go in there. And I'm thinking about the shape of the mark as well as much as possible. So I'm thinking all the time, how does that mark go around something? How does it refer to that mark or to that mark? So also now I'm looking in these goggles and there's a lovely reflected light through here into the side of these goggles here. So I'm going to put that in because that is actually a muted version of the hair colour. Right, let's put those in. And there we go. It's slightly more purple. Okay, so now I'm also looking at this area under the eye and above. So you've got your eyebrow, which is obviously a little bit dark, but it's not quite as dark as this. But I'd like to paint around the eyebrow first to give it some shape. If I know what this is, which is where the light's coming, so this is going to be lighter, there's a little bit of reflected light through here, and then there'll be a little bit more light there. So hopefully by building these areas of tone, we'll get a sense of the 3 dimension of the socket. So next to this first, I'm just going to put some orange in. It's a very interesting process, articulating things that I don't normally think about. I obviously do think about them, but it's not a conscious thing. So I'm trying as much as possible to tell you what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So here we go. So this again, next to this, there's a lovely darker area there, which is just a little bit, just gives a little bit of sense of form. And then next to that, it goes a little bit lighter again. But this time, there's a little bit of blue in it. So we go back to that colour again. And then next to that, there's a tiny bit of purple. And this is lighter again. And again, we're talking about, there we go. So eventually I'll look at this, and I don't actually like the way that the marks sit in a very linear way. So I'll think about a way of moving those marks around, possibly with a palette knife. So now I'm looking at this big area here. And I'm thinking this needs to be slightly cooler. It's a different pink from some of the other pinks on the face. I think because it's going through the mask, it's hitting some sort of colour and some sort of reflection that gives it a very slightly cooler look. I think above the mask, it's slightly warmer. So at the top, it's quite light. So there's a mark there that can cover that, and slightly cooler underneath. Slightly darker. Here we go. So underneath that again, it's slightly yellower. I'm going to add some yellow, touch of green to that. Now there's no actual white on the forehead at all. The lightest point seems to be this point here. And hopefully you can see now the distinction between this slightly cooler area and this slightly warmer area. So already we're making a distinction between the mask and the goggles and the skin itself. So now we're looking at this side. I'm just looking at the difference between the tone. The tone's very similar to this bit here, but it's warmer. I think because we're getting some very nice light coming on this side, although it's cooler to the edge, it's much warmer. So let's mix that up, and it's slightly pink. So there, we're starting to get a feel for the skin colour now. And I'm already now looking at this area here and how much darker this has got to be to give us the light, to give us this sort of shape towards the light that will give that slightly three-dimensional feel. I'm just going to put a shadow in somewhere, just to give me a sense of where it sits. So this shadow, I just want to put this in just to give me an idea of where it is. And then we're looking in this area again, thinking, well, okay, so we've got this sort of slightly, just in this area here, it sort of dips out. It's a bit dark, and it will give us an idea that it will just help the eye to sit in a space. The same with the nose. I mean, the nose we can't see at all, but we have to somehow imply where the nose is. And we know it kind of works in this area, but it'd be nice to give it some sort of feeling of it still sticking out underneath that mask. So let's work on this area here. Now I'm mixing in a massive pot of turpentine. I use balsam turpentine. I use a massive jug of it each day, which purely for speed, I just keep my brushes in and keep it moving around and keep them clean. Right then. There's some lovely reflected light through the goggle actually on here that I've just seen. So we'll get to that as well in a minute. So let me work on the dark underneath the eye. It's not really dark, but it is dark. It's pinky orange again. So let's just put something in there just to give us an idea of where it is. And then the same on the other side actually, something very similar. It's slightly warmer. So that can come under. And then under there again, this is cooler again. So we're looking at something that's slightly more purple. So again, I'm trying to exaggerate the colour as well a little bit to give real definition between each mark that I make. It's purely for my benefit, really. It's not for anyone else's. It's just that it helps me see where I am with the picture. There's just something under there. Now, it may be that needs to be lighter at some point. It could well be too dark. And in fact, next to it, I'm going to put some slightly yellow, much lighter yellow area. There we go. And hopefully this will just give it a slight... Actually, this area now is starting to look a little bit clogged and a little bit awkward. So I'm now thinking if I can resolve this bit here and maybe do a little bit more work around here, I can start to maybe play with that with a palette knife and see whether I can create something else through moving the paint around. I actually see this lovely line at the top of the goggles. And I think if I get this in first, this forehead, I think we can then get a sense of the fact that there's a piece of perspex running across there. So what I'm looking at here is this shape of tone here, which is not as light as this. It's slightly darker, but it's not as dark as I want it to be here. And it's slightly cooler as well. So it's a bit of pink, tiny bit of yellow. Hopefully this will sit nicely. So this will sit in here. Now that could arguably be a bit too bright, a bit too light. So let's take that down. There we go. And so that will be enough for now, just to give a sense of the difference between where the light's hitting and where it's starting to fade around. So then next to that, there's something quite yellow, but darker again. So that will go in. And I'm trying to do it in a way that may make the paint mark also be descriptive. So I don't want to just make, like we've done here, 3 linear marks would actually to the eye make you think, oh, they just don't work. They just look too obvious. I'd like things to move across, move in and out of things. And this is where maybe later on a palette knife could also help me make marks that I can't make with a brush. So we're starting to get a sense of the forehead now. I'd also like to start to think about the lightness of the hair and what kind of colour that is. I don't want it to interfere with any of the colour in the face, so I'm going to have to do something lighter, but perhaps more muted, slightly more grey. So I'm going to look at that now. And actually, I think partly purple. So it's a way of putting colour into the area without it clashing with what's going on elsewhere. let's just drop that in. Okay, so that will give us a sense of just a little bit of lightness in the hair. I think towards the back of the hair, it's still light, but it's slightly cooler. We'll just put a bit of green in there. I'm trying to make marks that reflect the flow of the material. So the hair comes across the head. So I'm thinking, well, marks essentially need to feel like they're working with the contour of the head. So again, we're going a touch darker this time. Here we go. So this is, again, coming through there. Now, what I'll start to do is work some of the hair colour back into those marks to give us a sense that it's not just a cut-off. It's things working within each other. But that gives us an idea of the tone of that area. Now we're looking, I think, to get this resolved so that we can start to look at playing around with this. So here, this area under here is it's a beautiful warm shadow, which is almost bright pink. Now, my brain is saying that bright pink shouldn't work as a shadow, but I'm trying to trust in the fact that if I work tonally fairly accurately, it should still work. And because we're looking at something that is reflecting light and absorbing it rather than blocking it, it's shadow in a different sense. It's not shadow in a sense of an object in the way of the sun. It's something that's slightly diffusing the light, but at the same time stopping some of it. So we're going to go with probably quite a pink actually. Here we go. And it may be that this eventually needs to be darker. So that will sit there, and then below that needs to be much lighter. So I think something again that reflects that slightly yellow green colour that I've been using. This more yellow, I think, this time. There we go. So slowly, there is something forming here. We're starting to get a sense of something happening in terms of 3 dimensions. I'd like to get some of this in now. And I'm seeing that there's a beautiful light sort of mark that runs most of the way across. So I'm going to try and put that in. Now, it's hard to say because, of course, it's light. I'm painting light rather than colour. So this is tonally very important that I get this right. So I think, for me, it's going to be something almost a very, very light grey. Just a tiny bit of colour through it, but it's predominantly grey, and it's very light. I'm going to try and trust the brush on this and just run it across for now. Again, that needs to be dark on the left-hand side. And again, a tiny bit cooler colour going through it. And so this will then... So underneath that, there is actually a slightly darker band that runs just slightly, and also I can invent to a point. And I think that maybe I need something that actually does say, this is this and that is that. But as we build this area here, hopefully it should start to describe it anyway. And so we can see to the right-hand side now, there is a certain sense that band at the top isn't actually light at all. It's actually much darker because it's reflecting the hair. So I'm going to put that in as well. But it is very grey, so it is very different from the hair colour. And I'm trying to go with the feel of the fluidity of what it's doing. The perspex itself is a lovely linear, a lovely fluid line. So now I'm thinking also of bringing this shape round on the right-hand side, and I'd like that to be very light, because I think I'm going to work dark onto that background. So again, it's quite a muted colour, but I think there's a little bit of pink in it. And so this is very light in this area here, and then this comes round here. So actually inside of this, I can choose what I do with it, whether I go with the color that's already there, or maybe use the illusion of the perspex diffusing the light to actually lighten that background a little bit. I'm going to see how it sits with what's happening here. And it may be that I have to alter that to make this come forward a little bit more. But it's a decision I can make later on. So now I'm thinking what I'd like to do is get some of these areas done here so that I can start to build this mask a little bit. And the mask being predominantly white, I'm trying to not overwork that. I'm trying to keep it really simple because it doesn't need to say a lot. It just needs to say enough to say that it's a mask. It gives me a little bit more intensity in the rest of the picture that way. So let's work under this eye here. And I think it's lighter again. So again, it's that slightly yellow, slightly green. And it's very light. That can just sit under there. Now above that, there is actually a beautiful orange that goes just to describe the bottom of that socket. We can put that in. And then above that, actually, there's a slightly purple, slightly lighter section. And this is more pink. This will go just there. Now, there is part of me that wants to work on an eye now. I think because at the moment it's very starey and it's a little bit. So I think it might be worth, if I can get one of these eyes in, because they're very different. This one is slightly more in shadow and this one is slightly more in the light. And although May's got very, very deep brown eyes, this one is very different from that one. So I'd like to show that sense of slightly darker, slightly lighter, just giving more of an idea of where the light's coming from. So let's start on this one first and get the depth of that in. So I'm going to go smaller brush for this. I don't really have a method for an eye, but I do tend to try and paint it in the way that it would sit in the socket. So I'm looking at the white of the eye first, which of course isn't white. And it's on here, I think it is slightly purple. And so it's not light by any means, but in terms of this area, it will be light. So let's put something in. So this is just an idea. And again, all of these things can change. So that may end up being too dark, may end up being too light. So now I'm looking at this area here and realizing that actually it's so much darker. And it's so much more purple. So I'm just going to put that in. But also at the same time, there is a slightly lighter bit at the bottom. So I'm just going to touch something in just to give it a lighter feel there. Okay, and so now we can look at the iris and the pupil. I don't paint things literally, so I'm looking at almost an approximation of what's there. So as I'm looking at the pupil, I'm thinking, right, there's probably 3 tones. The marks to describe those tones are variable, but as long as those 3 tones work and as long as we get a sense of it being an eye. So what I try and do is keep a line, keep an edge in a way, so to give it some sort of shape, but then it will work within that with the marks to make it slightly less still. So the first thing I'm looking at is the brown, where it's very, very deep. In fact, I'm going to put some deep sort of alizarin in, maybe some yellow, but I'm not over mixing it because I quite like the idea that these colours just sit and maybe make a little bit of a play on the canvas on their own. So I'm working with this just like that. So already you can see that it's in itself picked up a little bit of colour and run colour through itself, which is quite nice. It just makes it more interesting on the eye. So again, it's picked up a little bit of the eye colour, the white of the eye. So in terms of the middle bit, I think let's go dark. Let's really get some dark in that bit. We can run that across. Now, it's not a pupil as such, but it gives an idea. And then underneath, I'm realising actually we could put something lighter and warmer, maybe almost like some burnt sienna with some yellow, touch of red, and just run that underneath. That's, again, too dark. So I'm trying to keep the full impact of the colour without losing the tone. There we go. So now that will do. Now there is a light in the eye, so I'm actually going to put that in, just to give a sense of the 3 dimension and the light source. So okay, it's a light that is reflecting some of the eye actually and some of the colour. So it's almost a yellow light, but I'm going to put a bit of green in it because I want it to be very different from the colour of anything else around it. So it's just that there. Right, now, I'm now thinking this is an eye sort of floating in space and sort of, I'd like to now start to shape around the eye to give it a sense that it's behind something. So I'm looking now at what runs around it. Well, I don't want to start putting tiny little lines in, so I'm gonna work out roughly what tone that is, and then start to just run it around. So above the eye on the left-hand side, it's kind of a purpley colour as it goes into shadow. I'm just going to work that around like that. Now, it gets darker and it gets lighter depending on where it is. So let's put a bit of light through there on the top of the lid. And it's slightly green. So let's put that in there. And then underneath, I don't need to do a lot. I just need to run some different tones, just to some light going through there. And then next to the eye, obviously we get darker again. So I can start to just put some deep pinks and oranges. But this time I'm going to put a touch of brown through it to try and give it a slightly different feel to the oranges and blues, the oranges and pinks that are on the rest of the picture. So again, let's just knock that back slightly. And there is actually, again, a little bit in there. So now we're getting a sense of an eye. Hope you can see that. I think you can. But then now I'm looking at this area here thinking there's something not quite right about that. So I'm thinking, right, okay, so this needs to be darker, full stop. Underneath the eye needs to be darker. And there's a sense of I don't paint eyelashes. I don't do anything fiddly like that. But there is a sense that something darker needs to be in there. So I'm thinking, right, okay, let's continue some of the eye colour across, but this time put some purple through it, just to cool it down a little bit. That way it should separate what it's doing to what the eye's doing. Let's put that in there. So there we go, that's just darkened that slightly. And then underneath, actually, to make it slightly, hopefully make it slightly less starey as well. There's a sense that some orangey pink should go in there. But darker. So here we go. And that, just going in there a little bit. Now I definitely need the eyebrow in. And also, I'm also looking at this now as well. The face, the section that goes over the nose for the goggles. Now to describe that, I need to get this in first and then work around. So I want that shape of the nose piece in the same way that I worked this lovely line across to give it a sense of a solid, even though it's transparent, a solid thing, one object. So let's get that nose colour in. Well, that's very simple. There's a slight shadow underneath, which is effectively just a pinky orange. And then below that is just a slightly lighter version of it. So I'm going to make it a lot lighter just to give the distinction between the two. And I'm going to run that there. Now, the next thing we can do is literally work that around. So I'm going to, again, have to work with some reflected colour, because there is reflected colour in there, but also I want to separate the two. So in the same way that I did this, I'm going to have to make that cooler, maybe greyer, maybe more purple. So let's work on that first. Right. So just that section there and that section there, already that gives us something different. And actually it helps break up this area that is predominantly warm as well. So you're always looking for things to change the way the brain works when it's looking at something. So you're thinking, well, I don't want all of this to be warm, because your brain just thinks, oh yeah, that's a nice orange, a nice pink. I want things to challenge. So it goes to purple, it goes to green, it goes to blue. And that way your eye's constantly working, your head's constantly working. So on the far side of this, actually it's picking up some of this colour as well, but it's gone very cool. So I'm going to exaggerate it. I want to push it a little bit further than it actually looks on the picture. So I'm going to push it with some slightly purpley blue. And then on this side, actually above there's some highlight. There's something reflected quite strongly. So I'm going to look at that as well. So this time, this is a very definite highlight. This is very, very bright. It's probably one of the lightest points on the image. But that's not lighting. I don't want to just use white, but it'll pick up some of the colour from underneath. So there we go. So in some way, that's hopefully explaining what's happening with the face mask. And already, without painting it too much, we're starting to get a sense that it's there. To get more of a sense that it's there, we can start to put some colour in here around this area, some of the background colour, which will again bring that forward. Because as we can see on the goggles on this side, they are so light compared to what we're going to do with the background. And just that alone will do it. So let's do that first, actually, just to get a sense of it. One of the difficulties about explaining painting as it's happening is that obviously a lot of the decisions I make are very instinctive. I think most painters that work frenetically like I do often make decisions and then change their minds and then again within 2 or 3 seconds. So I'm constantly thinking, well, that could actually be purple, that could actually be that, it could be darker, it could be lighter. And over the course of a few days, of course, those decisions can play out. So I'm trying to be as concise and as focused on making very definite decisions as possible today, so it gives you an idea that this is coming together. So what I'd like to do with this background now is I'd like to, as we get to the hair, I might lighten it a bit to really give a sense of the dark against the light. But I'm going to change the colour slightly. Again, trying to get the eye looking in a different way slightly. So we're going to continue this slaty green sort of feel, but I'm going to start to run it into some sort of purple. Right, okay. So let's try and get a sense of how light it could be at the top. I'm thinking here, I'm trying to run it around the hair a little bit. So that's slightly lighter, and it's slightly more purple. I don't think it's particularly interesting though. So the only thing now is to think, well, maybe just let's flip it around. Let's put some yellow in it and see what that does, and see whether that just livens it up a little bit. Just to warm it slightly, but it's still enough of a contrast. So I think actually that works far better. And I'd like now this area here to be slightly warmer as well. It can be darker, but it still could be warmer. So I'm still working on this green. I'm still putting some grey through it, but I'm putting less grey and more yellow. Yeah, far better. Far better. Now I'm going to loosen this colour up a little bit. Because to cover this area, I'd like it to look a bit freer. So I've just put a bit of bit of turpentine into the colour, just to give it a bit more flow. So this now we can just get it on a little bit quicker. There we go. It's far better. And once you kill the white a little bit, it'll give a sense of what's happening in the rest of the face a little bit, but a little bit easier. We get a bit more of an idea of what's happening. Right, okay. So that, and I'm not very precious about where the paint goes. It can go anywhere. As long we can always work back through it. Okay, so I'm now thinking we do need something in here. Something's got to happen there. So let's change it up a little bit again and think, what can I put through it that will make it slightly different again? So maybe warmer. Let's put some brown through it and see what happens. Here we go. So this will be similar to the other side. There's slightly bit of pink in it as well. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. This will be better. There we go. So it's more muted than the other side. Then I'm thinking actually above the head, what do we do there? Because that will get dark again. But I'd like to lighten it even more. And I'd like a little bit more pink in there. So let's do that. So it's dipping around. Let's make it part of the picture. There we go. So again, now she's starting to come out. We're starting to see a little bit more of her now. And of course, now I'm doing this, I'm thinking, right, okay, this area here, which is the very furthest part of her skin, has got a massive reflection from here somewhere compared to the sort of pink and the orange. So one way or another, it will reflect either maybe a purple, maybe a green, something that will just give it a sense that we're moving from there to there without it being, bang, a really stark change. Because I think it's actually quite a subtle area on the side there. So let's look at that. So actually also at the same time, I'm looking at this being quite light, but actually there's an area here which is shadow, which gives a sense of where the brow dips in to the eye socket, which is actually, it's actually quite grey and it's quite purple. But it is very different to what's going on here again. So let's put that in first, because that is actually quite dark. And again, I'm trying to think of the colour to be interesting. So rather than it just being a grey purple, let's put something else through it as well. Let's try and make it a bit more. So I'm putting some sap green into it. I'm hoping this will give it maybe a touch of warmth as well at the same time. But this goes literally round here and just comes into there. Now, actually, I wonder whether that's interfering slightly with the eye. So I am actually going to grey it out a bit more. But I'm going to put some yellow in it and maybe a touch of blue and try just to, there we go. That'll be better. Yeah. It just knocks it back slightly. And if we get the rest of the brown, the light here, it will really sit as a whole thing. So let's work on this side here. So I'm thinking, right, okay. So we've got the hint of an ear somewhere there, which may be useful just to break the two things. But I'm thinking this is definitely purple. And it's going into something far warmer and far more orange. Right. Now there is part of me that thinks as well, as I'm doing this section, if it does sit very closely to the background, in a way that's not a bad thing. Because maybe we've got this stark areas here that are very much dark and light. Maybe this idea that it might move in and out slightly could be an interesting thing for the eye. Let's put that in. Now that's a nice, yeah, I think that works. And of course, we've got this slightly subtle line coming from the hair as well that's going to go in now. So if I put that in, that should give us a nice point of difference. And again, this hair is reflected. So it's reflected through the perspex. It's not the same as the hair above. It's slightly cooler and it's slightly greener. So so that should run like that. There she is. We're getting a sense of the face now. I see it in there. Yeah, it's coming together. So now let's look up here. I'm very much interested in getting the contrast between the two. So again, it's going to be dark. It's probably going to be quite yellow and quite brown. Wow, I'm going to have to get a move on. Time is ticking. See, this hour. Normally this would be days. Right, okay, let's do this. So let's get this in here. So again, we've got this nice shift now from what was just a block of colour. We're now starting to break this area up a little bit. And we're going to go around. And we're going to actually, as we move into here, it starts to warm up. Now I'm going to put some pink and some red and some orange through there as well. Here we go. There we go. So that starts to warm that area up. This also is doing a similar thing. And now we're looking at getting this. I need to get something here in as well. Let's do that. Right. And now we're looking at shadow. So we're looking at skin tone, but it is different for sure. It's got far more green in it. So I'm trying to run some green through what is there. There we go. So we've got red running through the colour. So that gives us a sense that it's still warm. It's still skin, but it's not. It's being affected by what's happening around it with the mask and with the shadow. I'm also going to run some slightly warmer colour around there. which is a slight contrast to what's going on next to it. There we go. And then on the other side, we're looking at something that is far lighter. There's far more light hitting this area. So I'm going to put that in, which is slightly, again, slightly greener, bit of red, bit of yellow. It's slightly dirtier colour. So let's just push that in. There we go. And then underneath, we are looking again at I'm now thinking there's something needs to happen here. Now, I don't want to describe the top particularly because I don't think it's the main event, but I do want to put something in. So I'm now looking at putting something deep, something blue. I mean, on the picture itself, you've got something blue, but very deep. It's got a slight bit of purple in it as well. But I'm only going to highlight this. I'm not going to overdo it. Right then. Let's work on this. So I've really gone deep now. This is almost black. So actually, if we were to push this through, if I was to push some white into it and I put it on, you will get a sense of the colour. But at the moment, this will almost go on black. So I just want to give an idea that there's something there. I don't want to say, hey, look, this is the top. It's got flowers on it. It's not what we're trying to do. I put a bit of green in the other side as well because I think there's a slightly more reflected green into the colour. So again, I like the idea that maybe it fades off. I'll tell you what we can do as well because I like the idea of things moving in and out of each other. I just maybe run a knife through that just to break it up a little bit. Okay, so we're going well. No disasters so far. Things are starting to build. We can get this resolved. Again, we're talking about painting what the light is doing rather than what is there almost. So again, we could get this mask resolved, get that in very quickly, because actually it's a very simple thing when you look at it. There's a few key shifts in tone will actually describe so much in this mask. So the first thing I'd like to do is nail this strip which holds the nose. I think we can get that sorted. We've got a very good chance of the rest just happening around it. So this is the continuation of the shadow, slightly warmer. So I want to get it slightly closer to that purple there. This will work very nicely. It's quite neutral. Again, we don't want to over-describe this. Everyone can read this visually as a mask. I mean, even what we've got on there so far says, yeah, it's a mask, it's goggles. It's not totally refined, but it's there. So I'm now going to think about all these subtle tone shifts. Now, I want this to be really light because this is the top, and I would never do this normally, but I'm just going to put some white on just to kickstart it. Okay. So now I realise that that's fine, but I'd like to put some sort of colour through it. Maybe a touch of blue. Because this particular blue, which is cerulean blue, is slightly warmer than some other blues. So if we were to use ultramarine, for example, it'd be quite cool. It'd be probably quite red. And then we're looking at this outside bit here, and I'm thinking grey. I'm thinking purple. Very simple. It's all about tone now for this mask. There's nothing else that's important really. This could be any colour. It's all about getting that tonal shift right. So here we go. It goes round here. There's a mark there. There's a mark into there, and then there's a mark through there. So that's just the edge. Then we work paint back into that. Okay, we're going back into that blue again. But this time a little bit more blue. Running out of palette space. Oh. Excuse me. Oh, that's not good. Sorry about that. So we're moving back into here. The joys of live feed thing. So here we go. So that's slowly then changing that obvious shift of a bit darker, very light. It's now made it light, slightly lighter, and then darker. So in some way, without blending something, your eye will do that for you. So also actually there's some underneath here as well, which is a very similar tone to this. Slightly more, yeah, probably slightly more purple. Just a touch, not a lot. Here we go. There we go. And that just gives a sense of that going slightly under. And again, we want to go darker here as well. It's got to be darker. So there we go. There we go. Now then, hopefully, if we put some more light through there, that will then give us, that's given us that shape. So let's get some light in that bit at the bottom there. And again, we'll look at this blue a little bit. Let's see if we can do that. And it should hopefully give us some nice shape through there now. There we go. So again, we're hinting at things. We're now going to go into the strip. Let's get this strip. I don't now. This is, I love the colour of metal. It's often got this beautiful sort of greeny colour to it. This has got exactly that. So I'm going to go straight in with the left-hand side, this bit here, which is going to be the lightest part of it, apart from the absolute highlight, the bridge of the nose. So I'm going to put that in, and then we'll look to the darkest bit, and then I can work the bit in between out. There we go. So let's run that up to there. Okay. So then we're looking at this part on the right-hand side. It's actually cool again. There's a little bit of red in it. Let's put that in there. And again, a little bit lighter. There we go. Right, here we go. So again, we get darker here though. As we get to the bridge of the nose on the dark side of the strip, it goes very dark, very steely, very green. Get this colour right. It's got to be absolutely spot on. There we go. So it's quite a contrast. Now, I'm not worried about the edge of things, although this is not a very neat edge. We can work paint back around things to make things look sharper. So two marks together can give that sharpness. So inevitably, we've almost, without trying, we've got the highlight on that side. Now we could play around with this forever, but I'm very interested in getting this shadow in now. So again, very similar to the neutral shadow below. It's slightly warmer this time. Slightly redder, slightly warmer. Okay, there we go. So what we can do, if we want to, we can start to look at the colours around this. So, for example, something's going on here, which is a very white, very light area, but it's got colour in it, and it's got, I think, again, a slight touch of purple. Right, so that runs under there like that. Now, as we get closer to this area here with the nose piece, you realise actually it greys out a little bit, so it needs a touch of shadow. And it's subtle, but it's really important, I think, that something goes there, just to drop that back. Now, as I said before, there's an area that's really annoying me. And that's this area here, which just feels it's a bit stuck. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put something darker here, and I'm going to move it around with a palette knife. I'm hoping this suggests something else, and it will do something visually, something different. So it's a bit redder there. Right, okay. So now I'm looking at that thinking, okay, this is all working, it's fine, but I'd like to make this happen in a different way. And I'd like, in a way, some of this to run through into the skin. A big part of my practice is often destroying things halfway through or even at the end to completely obliterate it with a knife and then rework it again. it's become almost a natural part of my practice now. And I think the big shift is once you can accept that destroying something is a part of it, actually you let it go a lot more. And by destroying something or part destroying something, it suggests more and more different things that you might not have thought about, things that had never entered your head through the whole process of making a picture. So here we go. We're going to push this through with a knife. Now, I try not to overthink this, but to just run something through like that, and you look at it and you think, okay, well, that's softened that area. So by working back into that, we can find the edge of this again. But in a way, it drops that back. And it's what I was talking about earlier, where I like the idea of a stark difference, but also at the same time, something softer, something where the eye's got to work hard to figure out what's happening. So this could happen in the hair as well. I could actually look at this now and think, well, wouldn't it be great to get some of this hair color into there? So I would think it's not a structural shift. I'm not trying to change the picture, but to just run some of that through, you could then think to yourself, well, I could pick up some of that. I could pick up some of this and actually drop it into there. It might suggest another color that I've not thought about. I do want to get actually a little bit of this in here. So a bit of this green that we've been using in the background, I think would work really well in the hair color, and just there. It just gives a sense of 3 dimensions even more, and a sense that it all links together. So that's going bang, 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 and it's this idea that it works as a whole, a rhythm, not just a coloured in portrait of my daughter. It's something more than that. It's a painting in itself. So now I'm looking also here. It's a very, very sharp contrast between the orange and the white. Well, actually, we could soften that. And there is actually some straggly hair. So I think there's a very good reason just to mix up some yellows, maybe a tiny bit of brown and a bit of orange, and just run this down just to break that up a little bit. It's just far more subtle. Now I'm also thinking, I'm very aware here now that I need something other than white, because that is just too much. So we're going to look at this background colour, but I'm going to shift it. So I'm going to put a bit of grey through that background colour to make it something dirtier, slightly purple, and a touch lighter. And hopefully that will, there we go. Just give a sense that the hair ends there somewhere. And on the other side, it's actually lighter. So although the light is predominantly coming from this angle here, it's picking up through this perspex on this side, actually lighter than it is on this side. So I think let's get some of that in. And in fact, before we do that, let's put something here just to really give it a bit of contrast. I'm aware actually we've snuck over the hour mark. I hope you'll bear with me. Right, okay. So that's just given us something a bit harder to work against tonally. There we go. So now we can get something here very quickly that will describe that area, and we could either leave it, we can play around with it, but I think it is quite light and it's quite warm. It's almost a skin color. It's almost a skin tone, whatever that is. So a bit of yellow, a bit of grey. I'm going to put some slight bit of, here we go. And it's light enough just to give that edge. And actually that can continue. We can put a bit more green and yellow through. There we go. There we go. And then actually through here, there is a lovely, very sharp line of the edge of the goggle, which actually runs around under here. And I'm actually going to put that in. Oh. There we go. Now this is, again, very light, but it's a very clean colour. So I've just put a tiny bit of very pale purple, like pale violet, and I'm going to run this to make this part of the goggle. Here we go. So it's a very simple line, and it's a very subtle line. You may not be able to see a great deal of it. You just see it coming through there. Now, if we wanted to, we could restate that. I don't like to too much, but it's probably picked up. There we go. There we go. Just make a bit more of it. And of course, on the other side, you've got some light coming through there as well. But on the other side, we've now got this area here that is actually lighter again. I think what we need to do first, though, is get some of that eye in. So let's get that eye in first. Now, there's a very good chance I'm going to have to complete this, finish this probably in the next few hours. But I'm hoping that this has given everyone a sense of how an artist goes about doing what they do, how they build a picture, how they think about painting, how it can be totally variable. I mean, within one piece that I've worked on today, I've had so many conflicting ideas about what I could do with it. And that's part of the joy of it, I think. So on the inside here, it's very pink, it's almost bloodshot. And then we're looking again at this iris colour, which is very warm, very warm. So let's get that in. So a lot of burnt sienna, lots of yellow, lots of, I'm not over mixing it, I'm gonna let it run. So now it's got a darker section as well. Now you see that needs to be warmer, it's not nearly warm enough. I almost want to go over the top with it and make it almost orange and yellow. There we go. And then dark again. So a bit of green this time in this. Now, there is, again, a highlight on the right-hand side. Which is slightly green. Let me put that in. And then, again, we're looking at what happens over the eye, below the eye. This one's easy, actually, because there's a very strong red that runs underneath. Like that. And above, there's a red that goes into a very, very light colour. But the red at the top is slightly cooler and slightly more purple. So if we run that from the top, now I can see that I've gone too far with that. So what I'm going to have to do is reshape that eye a bit. So we're going to run back and just put some more back in there. And then we can... Now that would be an example, possibly, where I would then get a palette knife and completely annihilate it. But for this, I won't do that. Okay, so that gives us an idea of that eye. Now, hopefully, and I can see now there's a bit of light there that will give... It's almost orange. There we go. And that's reflected back, I think, off of that mask. So now I'm looking, actually, we need some eyebrows because she looks like something's gone wrong. So let's get some eyebrows in. And now the eyebrow itself is actually, it's almost pink. Because obviously she doesn't have a great deal of eyebrow. So let's just put that in as almost like a pink mark. And it goes to more yellow there. Touch of grey. Maybe a bit of brown. Let's bring that into there. It just gives an idea. It also gives a little bit of expression to the face. Because I know fine well when we were taking these photos, she was laughing. So she was having a good time. I'll just put those in there. So that gives us a sense that in some way her eyebrows are higher. She looks slightly, you know, and if our eyebrows are higher, we're obviously usually happy. And then actually in here, there's then this highlight, but I need to paint the rest of it first. So if we go back into the colour around the eye, which is predominantly a yellowy green again. And we can see how light this is. It's very light around this area. And again, through there, it's not dark. And then here, there's this lovely light. It's almost worth putting it in with something else. It almost deserves a palette knife or something different to put it in. A different kind of material that will make it a mark that isn't like the skin. So I've just literally picked some paint up off the palette, some white, and I'm going to just push this in. So that just sits like that over there. And actually, in doing that, I can see that there's some somewhere else as well. And actually, you know, below the goggle here, there's a section that is just different. It's like a different material. And so it deserves to be put in a different way, maybe. And then we can run. Yeah, I think that works. Okay. So it's coming together quite nicely now. I'd like to just put something in here. At the moment, it's very stark. It's very sort of a white line. It's like an edge. It's like something falls off a cliff at the end of it. I'd put some slightly cooler, greener colour in there, just to give it the sense that there's something else. So now we're looking at this again. Looking at this area again, there's something not quite happening there that should be. I wonder if we can warm that up again, or turn that into the face mask colour, but then shift it back into the. Here we go. Let's try that. Yeah, that's better. So we again try not to be too many barriers, so too many hard edges. Again, these whites here are starting to annoy me a little bit, so I'm thinking, right, okay, let's drop some colour into those. And again, it's light. This is where the light's hitting all the time on this side. And again, now I can see that this needs to be something slightly cooler. So that goes into there. And it's almost a purpley, grey purpley colour. So let's put that in. It's a bit too grey. Let's remix that. Right, that's perfect. I think we're nearing an end. I think we're getting to a point now where this, in one way or another, is a picture. It's a few tweaks here and a few tweaks there down the line, and this will be, I think, pretty good. There we go. Just give a sense of that. So I'm going to leave that there for now. I think I will have another look at it in an hour or so and see whether there's a few bits that I can change. But hopefully that's given you a good idea of how I go about what I do. As I said at the beginning, this is the Fine Art Fever challenge, and it is a challenge, believe me. There will be other artists doing this. There's certainly a sculptor, a well-known sculptor, going to be doing this in the next week or two. I'll also hopefully be doing one or two other ones, possibly with figures involved, possibly with hands, possibly with objects. And I'll, again, sort of restate the way that I work, the way that I make things. Don't forget, if you're watching this live, it's a clap for carers tonight. So everyone should do their bit as much as possible to support our NHS and all those working in the social services, public services. It's a tough time for everyone. So hopefully this has given an hour of interest for some people. Hope to see you again soon. Cheers.